So we just wrapped up a pretty long-winded lesson. This one is going to be much simpler. We're going to break things down at this point in the section to be a little bit more granular. Obviously, we threw a lot of moving parts at you with the life cycle stuff. So if you felt like you were a little bit lost there, no worries. We're actually going to start breaking that stuff down at this point. So the very first thing, and this is one of the absolute essentials, if not the essential thing with function calling, is you actually need to master or at least just get really good at generating function call schemas. Okay, so again, function call schemas are what you see here. Okay, so this is the object that you're going to see. Okay, this is basically a JSON format, which just stands for JavaScript Object Notation. This is the format in which you need to pass a function call, in the way you need to actually write these things and pass them to the LLMs as tools, okay? So you need to get really good at this, and what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to kind of be breaking down what each one of these kind of parameters mean, what does description mean, how do I make my description as effective as possible, things like that. So let's actually jump in with a real working example, which is we're going to get a little bit of a sneak peek here of something that we're going to be covering in the next lesson, which is this weather.ts. So again, just a reminder, make sure at the start of all of these lessons, especially on the ones that we write code, you're going to want to make sure to run git pull origin main so that you grab the most up-to-date code for the files that we're going to be working in, which in this lesson is going to be the weather.ts file here in the tools folder here. Okay, so make sure you have that, and once you have that ready, we'll have a link for that below as well. You're going to be all good to go. So let's go ahead and look at the function definition. Again, we're going to use function definition, tool schema, function schema. All of these are fairly interchangeable. We're referring to this sort of JSON object here with how in this case, the OpenAI API expects function calls to get passed in. And again, the nice thing about this is that all of the APIs are pretty standard. So if you're using something like Claude with Anthropic, things like that, all of these kind of core principles are going to hold. So let's actually dive into this function definition. Hey guys, really quick, I'm just going to interject this video with a trick that you can use with the OpenAI API. You can actually use, whether you want to use ChatGPT, the OpenAI Playground, Claude, Google AI Studio, anything that you need. This is a very simple prompt that you can use to help you generate really high quality, consistent function calling schemas. So what you'll see here is I'm just working in the OpenAI Playground here. And what I have is I have this system prompt, okay? I'm going to make sure I include this below so that you can use it. But you can see it's very, very simple. It's just saying you help generate schemas for function calls. Here is an example of a function call. And what we do is we just pass it an example of a function call in that JSON format. Okay, so this is one of the things that, again, this kind of is a callback to the example that OpenAI uses here. And what we're able to do is if I clear this, and again, you can use this with any AI tool you want. Just the important thing is that you need to use this as the initial query or the system instructions, however you're kind of interfacing with the model. And what you want to do is in your user message, you can say something like, I have a function I need, it's generate code, it needs a file path, some code, and either create, update, or delete. Okay, so we're basically saying, hypothetically, I have some code generation agent, I need a function call, and these are kind of the three parameters that I need. So what you'll notice is we ran that. Okay, again, I'm just doing this in OpenAI's Playground here, which we'll have a link for. This is a really nice tool that OpenAI has, but again, use it with whatever you want. You can see we got a fully generated schema, a fully generated kind of blueprint that we can pass to the LLM as one of its available tools. And you can see it kind of handled everything for us pretty well, okay? So we got a good name, generate code. That's a great name for this function. Looks like the description, generate code in a specified file path with the ability to create, update, or delete code. Okay, pretty good description here. And then we got the file path, the code, and the action. You can see it's correctly defining everything that we have available. It's requiring the correct file or the required parameters that we need. Okay, and we can, of course, tweak this any way we want. But what this method allows you to do is you just kind of get a really quick function schema generated with an AI tool. and then you can kind of tweak it to your liking, right? So on a lot of the more simple use cases, this is going to be sufficient. On some of the more advanced tool cases, you may have to actually go in here and tweak things, but this is a really easy way that you can generate function calling schemas really quickly with AI, and I just wanted to include that as part of this video. So in this case, we have a tool called getWeather, and this is our function schema that we have written for this particular function. So you can think of a function schema almost like a blueprint of how a function should actually be executed. So what we're basically doing is we're defining the structure of that function so that the model kind of has a blueprint to work with. That's kind of how you should be thinking about that in a really simple way. So one of the things that we can do in our blueprint here is we can give a name. Okay, so we can actually name the function, which is typically going to be something very simple, very direct. You can see in this particular example, we're just using getWeather, right? It's very clear what that is. And especially as you do things like, if you have a pretty complex agent and you have like 10 tools in there, it's going to be really important that you differentiate the names between all of those functions, because you want to try and make it as clear as possible based on each one of these tool blueprints, each one of these function call schemas that you provide to the AI model. You want to make sure that it kind of has the ability to discern when it should use A versus B versus C and that kind of thing, right? If you think about it in the context of a human, right? If I were to pass all of the tool schemas to a human and say, okay, you have access to all of these different tools, all of these different function calls, I'm going to give you a request, and based on my request, you need to pick which one of these pieces of paper you're actually going to use based on my request, right? The clearer you are with all of this stuff, the more accurate the model is going to be, the better results you're going to get. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to be defining the name, we're going to be defining the description of the function. Okay, so the description, you can see in this case, we're only using one tool and it's a fairly straightforward tool. So our description is pretty simple, but there are going to be cases where you have maybe a more complex function and you may want to add not just a quick little sentence here, but you may want to add a paragraph here. You may want to add a paragraph with a couple of examples of when to call it, right? The nice thing, the kind of opportunity that you have with the description parameter here in a function call is you can be as detailed and precise as you like, right? And you got to remember, like, these are the instructions that the LLM is going to see, right? This is the blueprint that the AI model has to work with. So when you're kind of going throughout defining one of these schemas here, you really want to use the description parameter in particular as kind of where you're doing the most complex instructions, right? This is where you can do, if you're familiar with some kind of prompting principles, things like few shot prompting, right? Which is just adding kind of examples, adding, input output pairings that you can use to help the model understand when and how it should actually go about a specific function call. So we'll get into examples down the road that are a lot more complex than this. Again, we're just trying to kind of simplify things and break things down to be really granular and really clear. And this getWeather function is just another nice one of those simple examples. And then this is where things get a little bit different, right? I think name and description, pretty self-explanatory. But when you get to parameters, this is where you need to be a little bit more strict in how you actually define things, because this is going to affect how the function actually gets called. And if you affect how it gets called, right, it's going to affect the parameters that come back to you that you're actually going to pass into your code base, where you actually want to kind of call the parameters that the LLM generated. Okay. So with the parameters here, you can see in this case, we have a single parameter. Okay. So you want to define parameters as a type object, and then each parameter is going to have properties. So in this case, one of the properties of this object is going to be location. Okay. So we're defining this as a type of string, which just means text. Okay. So type could be number, right? It could be a Boolean value, which is like a true false. It could be any kind of data type that you may find that tends to be pretty common in programming. And then we have, just like we do with the function, we have the ability at kind of the property level to define the description of the property, right? So in this case, this is going to be the city and the state. This is going to be, you can see we give it kind of an example of how to format things. What you'll notice if we kind of scroll up here, one of the things that we're going to be doing the next lesson is actually using this tool. you can see in the mock weather data, we have all of these different locations that I've kind of mocked some of the more popular cities in the United States. So one of the things that the model needs to do is it needs to be able to identify which item in this array of data here that it needs to actually kind of use as a lookup variable to get the right information. And the way we're doing that in this particular example is we're using the location and we're using the city and the state code there. So you can see by defining that format, when we actually get the response back from the function call and we kind of guide it, we're actually going to kind of get the right format that we need. So if I say, I need the weather for Chicago, it's going to know, okay, I need to do Chicago, IL, right? So that's going to look up this piece of data. We're going to get this information back. And that's how the LLM is going to know to give us kind of the answer that we need, right? So you can define as many parameters as you want. You can get pretty crazy here. So again, we're going to get into examples where we have, 4, 5, 6 different properties here. And we kind of, maybe 2 of them are required, but 4 of them are optional. So we're going to get into kind of all of the complexity of defining your different properties and your different parameters and deciding when they should be required. But the nice thing about this required area is that we can basically mandate that the LLM actually use that variable. So this is something that's, for example, to go back to the previous lesson with that get delivery date function that OpenAI wrote, right? The parameter that they had that was required was that order ID, right? Because without that parameter, you can't actually pass anything to the code that you wrote. Okay, so the nice thing about these function calls and the way that OpenAI in particular is kind of standardized how you call these things is you can define these required parameters so that anytime the LLM decides it needs to call your function, you're actually getting at minimum the data that you need to actually call the function, right? So you won't really have any weird bugs, weird disconnects between the result from the function call that the model gives you and the ability to actually call your code. So that's super nice. So one of the things that is super nice about this is you have right? Like this is very structured. Okay, so things are going to be very consistent, which means that the more you build tools, the more familiar you're going to get with kind of all the core principles, and you'll know some of the more subtleties of like, okay, this is how the model performs better with names and descriptions and things like that. But you also have kind of all of the flexibility that you need to make these things as simple or complex as you need. So that's kind of just a really general overview on the schema side of things. So you just want to think of function calling as a way that you can give blueprints to the LLM so that they know all of the different tools that they have available to use and all of the different parameters that they need for those different functions that they actually need to generate so that you can pass these on and get your agents to actually do things in the real world, whether it's retrieval, whether it's action taking, all these sort of different tasks that you kind of see in some of these more popular use cases. So let's actually get into less of theory and more into practical stuff, and we'll actually start running this weather function.